Thanks. Welcome to Impact Careers, hosted by Prescott College. My name is Pamela Delaney, and I'm the Dean of Enrollment here at Prescott College. At Prescott College, we create interdisciplinary, experiential, and diverse learning environments that inspire future leaders to create a healthy, just, and sustainable world. And we've launched this career series, this Impact Career Series, to support all of you and the communities that you support and as you seek and find and create meaningful work that contributes to the vision of the future that we all hope for. Today, we're going to be focusing on a growing range of careers that address the threat of climate change. And we'll talk about what we found when we looked at the career data and learned directly from our panelists, who are three amazing people who has careers are making a direct impact. So before we get started at the session, I do want to let you know that the webinar is being recorded. We make this webinar available free via our website for folks who are unable to join us. So please understand that if you participate in chat, you're agreeing to allow Prescott College the option to capture what you've expressed or the resources you've shared to distribute as part of the webinar series. We do really appreciate the ability to do this for those that can't attend us and are able to watch the session later. I'd also like to introduce my amazing co-host, Angelina Smith, who's Associate Director of Admissions. She's based in Portland, Oregon, who will be monitoring the chat to share information and capture any questions that you might pose for the panelists. You know, the chat is really for you. It's a great community building space, so feel free to pop in, introduce yourselves, say hello, provide us you know, a brief introduction where you are and a few words about why you're registered for this session. And throughout the panel, throughout this panel, I'll have some questions that I'm going to kick off, but your questions are welcome at any time. So put those in the chat and Angelina will let me know and she'll speak out those questions for the panelists, because this really is for you as an attendee to engage with our amazing panelists. This is the last in a series of 5 Impact Career panel sessions that we've had. You can see our previous sessions on our YouTube channel, on our Prescott College YouTube channel. We did a session on community health and well-being, careers in environmental, social, and governance, ESG careers, education training, and social justice and equity. So to get started, I wanted to just give you a little bit of a background on how we're doing things here at Prescott. And so, okay, so we've got the data from this from 2 places. The data that we use to analyze what careers are growing or in the area of climate change is from a database called MC, which used to be Burning Glass, and this is a repository of job postings from all around the world, where it captures data on job postings, sorts them through to make sure that they aren't that they're unique postings and not duplicates, and provide some really good data on what employers are looking for, skill sets, demand, and then also ONET, the government website that provides a lot of information as well. We're going to be talking today to 3 amazing professionals who are making a current impact in climate change: Amanda Sesser, Stephanie Pettit, and Laird Christensen, and I'll get to them in just a little bit. So to start with, I wanted to just frame climate change. So I think that most of you are probably looking at this type of work as an option or continued work that you're doing, because you really know that we're in a dire, very important place in the world where climate change is a pressing issue, and an emergency issue, really. And so there's that desire to make a change, but what does it mean? How can you have a career in this area? There are so many industries. One of the things about climate change mitigation, adaptation, addressing this major challenge is that it impacts everything we do, from our education systems to financial investments. Of course, we often think of things like renewable energy and agriculture and natural resource preservation, but it can also mean things like advocacy and policy, carbon capture and new technologies, and transportation, things like that. So this slide shows you, I got this from a great website. It's called climatebase.org. And what you'll find on this slide is that it has or in this website is that there are jobs located in these climate change sectors. So feel free to check that out. You can see here that there are quite a bit of jobs listed under these different sectors within the industry. We're seeing a dramatic investment in innovation related to climate change, and this is exciting. And I think that there's opportunities that will be coming up that we haven't even conceived of yet. So just literally a few hours ago today, the Department of Energy announced that it is investing $53 million in diverse small organizations that are focused on technology and scientific innovations. This is going to impact funding for 259 projects across 38 states. And so an example is river connectivity systems in Bainbridge, Washington, where work will be done on hydroelectric systems to provide safer passage for fisheries. And then in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, there's Advanced Cooling Technologies, which is looking at a way to create a direct CO2 capture that uses low voltage electricity and low temperature heat. So there's just, I think that when you're looking at this, this is why I get excited about careers in this area, is because there are things that are happening rapidly in innovation and technology. So I took a look at MC, our database, and I asked it to provide me with a certain set of data. I asked them to say how many job postings in the last calendar year, so exact year, no job titles, asked specifically for hard skills in climate change. And by hard skills in climate change, that could be climate modeling, it could mean greenhouse gases, climate policy, very specific skill sets. And what that showed me is in the last year, there were 7,325 unique job postings that looked specifically for climate change skills in their job description. 58% of those postings desired a master's degree as a desirable. And the top 5 skill sets that were looked at, some of them had a harder time finding applicants that have these skill sets: climate change mitigation, greenhouse gases, agriculture, climate policy, and environmental science. And the median advertised salary across all these positions was about $78,700. So as you know, it's a growing industry. You can do amazing work and earn a good income. There are, and what we do have are some specific data on some very, I just wanted to kind of show you some examples of how you can have different careers in climate change. So for example, I looked at climate change policy analysts. These are policy analyst positions, but those that are focused on climate change. There were just over 2,000 unique postings alone for this last year. And this is expected to grow about 5%. Policy analysts overall, not just climate change, but we're seeing an increasing number of the policy analysts needing that specialization. And so we are seeing a 5% increase, which is about the national average. And the average posted salary is a little over $76,000 for that. Another growing, actually a considered bright future per ONET is forester positions. So urban foresters, forest conservation, fire prevention, and those, there were 3,766 unique postings last year. Not as many hold a master's degree, but for people that are moving into management or maybe pivoting careers, that master's degree is going to be very beneficial. And there's some great demand, over 10% growth between now and 2030. So there is a high demand for that. And the average posted salary is just a little over $64,000. Environmental restoration planners. So there are environmental planners, but specifically positions out there looking for people that are helping to restore habitats. And so that's another area that we're seeing some growth in. And that average posted salary for that is around $73,000. And of course, a big one, renewable energy specialists. So this one's interesting because, there are positions that are related to maybe renewable energy consulting and advising, but also things like sales, as organizations are increasing their renewable energy resources at their locations. There's a need for individuals to come out and advise them and help them find the best solutions and basically get those systems installed. And then of course, sustainability consultant, sustainability specialists continue to be a large growing population. There are over 1.4 million consultants, specialists in the United States. They aren't all sustainability, but we're really moving into the time when a time when every job is a green job. Every job is focused on sustainability and climate change at some level, because it is such a pressing issue, and everything that we do, again, regardless of our job or industry, does have an impact in some way on climate change. So I just wanted to share some of that with you. And we can provide that data for you if you're interested. Just send me an email. Angelina will put my email in the chat, and so that way, if you're interested, you can email me and I'll send you some more information on those. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to your three panelists. What I'll do is I'll introduce them one at a time and let them take a moment to introduce themselves. So to start with, we have Dr. Amanda Sesser. Amanda, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Pamela. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah, I apologize to everyone. My childcare fell through. It's we're 2 hours ahead of you all in Central Time Zone, and so if you see me moving around a lot or the computer just gets knocked off and then it's looking at the ceiling for a minute, please forgive me. That's my life right now with a 1.5-year-old twin. But thank you for the opportunity to serve on this panel. It's exciting to be here with Stephanie and Laird. I have been working in the climate change field now for over 20 years. I started in around 2001 as a researcher. So I originally thought I was going to take the academic path. And I began researching climate impacts in the tropical Andes and Amazon rainforest in the early 2000s. And I asked research questions about how does, for instance, going up the Andes Mountains, how does biodiversity and carbon cycling change as you go uphill using the altitudinal gradient as a proxy for temperature changes, and using that information then to model how future climate change might impact carbon and biodiversity in forest ecosystems in the future. And I also worked across the entire Amazon basin from Peru east to Brazil, looking at mapping disturbance regimes using hyperspectral remote imaging to figure out, how will windstorms impact, again, forest biodiversity, forest carbon cycling, different forest processes in the future if the windstorms become more common. And I had various methods for doing so, but I did a lot of measuring carbon out in the middle of the rainforest and camping for weeks at a time in the middle of nowhere, getting dropped off with just nothing more than a backpack, a machete, and rubber boots, and a team of 4 or 5 people. We would go out for weeks at a time, putting in forest vegetation plots, identifying the trees, and starting to put infrared gas analyzers on the leaves and around the bark to understand how the carbon flux works in these forest plots, and then scaling up to the entire ecosystem so we could say something about ecosystem impacts to climate change. And then in 2007, I switched locations completely and began working in Alaska and Northwest Canada with very similar research questions, still with ecophysiology and looking at forest systems, impacts of climate change. But I wanted to learn a different tool set. So I did my Ph.D. in a molecular biology lab where I worked with population geneticists and evolutionary biologists to understand how past climate impacts have left a signature on the DNA of forests, of individual trees and of the forest. And so we use genetics to identify how trees have been impacted by climate change in the past, and then use that information to project that forward in models looking forward. And I also did some common garden experiments where I planted trees and then artificially warmed them to experimentally show how growth and fitness might change in a warming climate. Then in 2011, I realized after I, was just finishing my PhD, and I realized that I'm more interested in what do we do about climate change. And I felt like if I wanted to have a career that had that was part of the solution, that I needed to work more with people. So I wanted to get out of the woods and get working more with people. And trust me, I could have lived my whole life in the woods and been just fine. And not that that work isn't important to understand how climate impacts are going to affect ecosystems, but I felt like I was being called to work more on the policy side and natural resource management side of the equation. So for the last 10, 11 years, I've been working with natural resource managers and policymakers on how we take the scientific information that's out there and use it to make policy and to make natural resource management decisions that are informed by climate change or are climate smart. I've managed large-scale, landscape-scale conservation partnerships, first in Alaska and Northwest Canada, integrating over 30 organizations, including federal, state, and local governments, tribes and First Nations, research institutions, and nonprofits. Thinking like if we can all get together, one agency or organization alone might feel helpless to do anything about climate change, but when we all work together, then we have a lot more power than we do individually. So from there, I left in 2017 to become a sustainability consultant, like Pamela had on that slide. And I worked for 5 years around the globe, mostly in the Americas, from Canada to Chile, working with environmental ministers and high-level policymakers on interpreting the science to inform policy and to make good strategic policy that is robust in the uncertain future. And I also started working on something called the co-production of knowledge, which is how do you get people that are impacted by climate change to the table to be part of the research process and part of finding solutions. It's important for a couple of reasons. One is because if people who are using the information aren't part of making the information, they're less likely to trust it and use it. So it can help close the science policy gap, so to say. Why do we have all this science and why are the policymakers not using it? But the other reason why we want to do co-production of knowledge is because it empowers folks who are most impacted by climate change, like tribes and indigenous people, like people of color, and people in developing nations, especially women and children in developing nations. So how do we get them at the table? How do we empower the entire team so that the researchers don't have all the power to come up with shared solutions? And I've been doing that, like I said, for the last 5 or 6 years. And then just recently, this past February, I went back to working with the federal government, with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I am the director for the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy, or CCAS, in the Southeast. It's the 15 southeastern states, plus Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And we're all working together to for a goal of increased health, function, and connectivity of our landscapes. And we have indicators that we're measuring to see how well we're doing. But it's also a way for us to look at how we can stratify across the entire Southeast to look at climate resilience. And where in the scheme of things are certain landowners or certain land managers, where could they manage for resistance or keeping things the way that they are right now? Where are those refugia or places that are going to be slow to be impacted by climate change? And then where are the areas where we can, well, we just might have to put up our hands and say, there's nothing we can do. We're going to have to just walk away. And where do we accept those changes? And then where are the areas where we direct change? So are there areas where the coastal marsh is going to be inundated by sea level rise? And we actually need to do assisted migration to move the marsh upslope. And unless we take a large picture view, if you're just looking in at a particular land ownership, then you might miss where you are in that continuum of adaptation actions. And I will, as Pamela mentioned, I am calling in from New Orleans, Louisiana, which is an area that is at the intersection of environmental justice and climate change issues. And I'm calling in from the ancestral lands of the Chitimacha people.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That's amazing work. And the interagency collaboration is just fascinating because, yeah, how things get done with so many people working together. I'm sure it's a fascinating, rewarding, and probably challenging thing to do. So thank you. Next, I would like to introduce Stephanie Pettit, who is coming to us from Portland, Oregon. Stephanie.
All this time working from home, I still forget to unmute. Hey everybody, thanks for having me. So my undergrad was in marketing, and I was kind of aimlessly lost, not sure what I wanted to do with my career at all. And if you have an undergrad in marketing, basically you have to go back to school and get a master's in it or do something else. So I went back to grad school. And while I was there, I took a survey course in sustainability, and it's like a light went off in my head. Oh my gosh, this is the intersection of all of my professional education knowledge and my passions, and this is what I want to do. So I immediately chose to specialize in sustainability. My capstone in graduate school was with the Jepara Forest Conservancy, helping them plan an eco-educational facility in Indonesia so that they could, and they were going to fund it with the harvesting of down lumber, really nice tropical hardwoods that fall down during a hurricane. They take it, they build something nice out of it using local craftsmen, and then ship it off to wherever in the world for a great price. And then they use that money to reforest tropical forests in Indonesia, and also create educational facilities to teach the locals about non-timber forest products that they could be selling instead of cutting down their trees. So that was a really cool experience. Just solidified for me that this is the path for me. So I got my master's in international management with a focus on global sustainable business. Feels like an oxymoron saying global sustainable business, but it is what it is, right? So then I went and I worked for the Institute for Culture and Ecology as a consultant. I did multiple non-timber forest product research papers that we published. Basically, I was working with the forest scientists, and I was the business person, and they were informing what is required to be successful cultivating these non-timber forest products, how to harvest them correctly, how to market them well. And then I came in with the business portion of it, and basically we created these business plans for people so that they could go to a bank and say, I have 100 acres of forest, I don't want to cut down the trees, but I need a livable income. Here is my plan to harvest huckleberries, collect truffles, et cetera, Oregon grape. There were 5 different products that we selected for that. That was funded through the US Department of Agriculture. I went on to work in the energy efficiency sector. My skill sets were, and always have been, project management and stakeholder engagement coordination, right? So you don't have to be a scientist to be working in the climate field, right? Obviously we need them, but that's not what I am. So in the energy efficiency sector, I was reviewing new technologies that come out and seeing if they were going to save enough energy for us to be paying an incentive on them, doing the cost benefit analysis. And did that for several years. Ended up working on smart grid with the US Department of Energy at Bonneville Power Administration. Got to see some really great water turbines, ran a whole bunch of pilot programs on demand response, and doing the interconnections for batteries, battery research, The policy is a huge part of climate change, right? Because it's not just about the science of climate change. There's also, the politics of getting energy providers to do the work, to do the interconnect agreements so that somebody can be feeding their energy that they're producing on their roof back into the grid. Because that is actually a really complicated thing. And the more power you're generating, the more of a problem that can become for the grid. You could collapse the entire grid if you're not balancing the power that's being generated with the power that's being used. So massive implications. Like when you think about the wind turbines, so in Eastern Oregon, a whole bunch of wind turbines got built using a bunch of the tax credits that were made available by the federal government. Excellent policy. Yes, let's get those windmills. But the problem was the infrastructure did not exist to bring the power from the windmills to the places where it was needed. And so it became a massive lawsuit, and the people who built the windmills actually ended up having to pay the electricity companies to take their power so that their windmills wouldn't get ruined. And so, it was quite interesting. So there's a lot of policy involved in energy efficiency and climate overall. Eventually moved on from energy efficiency and demand response pilots and programs to where I am now. I'm at the US Department of Agriculture using a different skill set of mine. I originally started undergrad thinking I was going to be a computer programmer and quickly realized that was not the life for me. And now I am working with the developers to provide the products that our hydrologists and meteorologists and climatologists need to be able to ingest the data that's coming in from thousands of locations, deep in Alaska, clear down in Puerto Rico, all over the United States. We have snow data and water data coming in from automated systems or from snow courses, which are, so I could go on for days about how cool the jobs are of the scientists, but at the end of the day, I'm just I'm the cat herder that pushes for the money we need to come from the higher ups in our organization. I push for our IT projects to get approved because the thing that I've learned about my scientists, because we're all friends, it's a very small office. The thing I've learned about them is they are exceptional at the science, and they are so they want to work towards consensus by getting through all the issues. They're not as great at advocating for their business needs. And so here I come, and that's what I do for them. And I love it. I love every day of my work. And we're hiring. We need hydrologists. We need people who are willing to ride a snowmobile into the depths of the woods and fix our snow-tail machines. And so I'll stop there. I am on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect with people if anybody wants to learn more about what I'm doing or want to step in with somebody. I can totally, or just talk through it. So that's me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And we can provide your LinkedIn link in the chat in just a bit so that if people want to connect with you, they can. Thank you so much. I really appreciate how your career reflects just the multiple disciplines, right? So, how people might not think and how it's moved from marketing, energy efficiency, IT, and data. So it illustrates exactly what we were talking about early on about how this is touching everything that we do. And last but not least, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Laird Christensen, who leads our master's programs focused on resilient, sustainable communities and environmental studies. So I will turn it over to you, Dr. Christensen.
Thanks so much, Pamela. I know quite a few of you. It's great to see so many students from my programs on the list, and hope I get a chance to meet the rest of you. My path is kind of a roundabout path as well as some of the others that we've heard about. I did grow up in Oregon, so we've got that connection with Stephanie. But I traveled around quite a bit after high school. I didn't feel ready for college. And during that time, I started writing about the adventures that I was having and was lucky enough to start publishing stories and poems fairly early. So when I did decide to go to college, I thought, well, I guess I'm an English major. And that's how it started for me. About 3 years into my undergraduate career, and I happened to be in New Hampshire at the time, that was just where I was when I thought it was time to go to college. I took an environmental studies course and suddenly realized, oh my gosh, this is what I'm really passionate about. But by that time, 3 years in, I had pretty much all my English credits done. And so I graduated as an English major, but then started looking for a graduate program where I could combine the communication skills of an English major, the storytelling skills of sort of cognitive perception. I mean, the way that we make sense of the world is by telling ourselves stories. And so there are ways that the narrative strategies of studying stories can really help us effect what I think of now as the great transition as we move from a petroleum-based industrial economy to a post-petroleum economy. So it didn't feel like wasted time. But when I found myself in graduate school trying to bring together environmental studies with literary studies, my advisor at the time told me memorably, spike trees on your own time. You're here to study literature. And boy, he couldn't have chased me out of that program quickly enough. I finished my master's, that was at the University of Illinois. And then I went back to rangering. I had been a seasonal ranger for a number of years and probably would have stayed in that position. But then I found out about a PhD program that actually did combine environmental studies and literary studies. And it just happened to be back home for me at the University of Oregon. So I traveled back to the West Coast and spent 5 wonderful years getting my PhD there and was really able to create a multidisciplinary dissertation that drew not only on environmental studies and literary studies, but also religious studies, sociology, history. It was very interdisciplinary. And but it meant that I was pretty much suited for a job at one of the handful of schools around the country that had an environmental focus woven throughout the curriculum. We sometimes think of those schools as the Eco League schools. Prescott College is one of them, Northland College, College of the Atlantic. Well, back then at that time, Green Mountain College was probably the oldest Eco League school. And I was lucky enough to get a job there and spent almost 20 years in Vermont teaching at Green Mountain College, a place that I really, really came to love and had a chance to get to know that Vermont series of ecosystems that were so very different from where I had grown up. Sadly, a few years ago, Green Mountain had to close its doors, but Prescott College brought in some of the faculty, about 150 students, and our graduate programs as well. So I'm delighted to still be at an Eco League college. These days, I split my time between Prescott, which is the unceded land of the Yavapai, who continue to live in Prescott today, and here in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Southwest Virginia, the unceded lands of the Tataro people who've actually been, for the most part, removed from this area for about 350 years. It's quite remarkable. Anyhow, to talk just briefly about how this brought me to create both the graduate program in environmental studies and one in resilient and sustainable communities. Like Amanda, I would have been happy enough to just stay out in the forest and try to avoid the problems created by industrial societies around the world, until it became increasingly clear that no matter how far out in the woods I was, those forests were starting to feel the impact of a changing climate. And in my case, in Oregon, that was beetle infestation of the forests that I was seeing. And I realized, well, I can do all this activism to protect these little parts of the forest, but the real root of the problem is in the cities. It's in the way that people make a living. And I guess I need to start to engage in that sort of activism and that sort of education where we can start to make this great transition to a post-carbon future. And then when my son was born about 12 years ago, that gave me even more incentive to try to do what I could to help address the dysfunctions of the way that we live our lives right now, the way that we quote unquote make a living here. So it was in 2014 that I designed the MS in Resilient and Sustainable Communities, working with a group of faculty, some of whom still teach in the program. And I may mention Bill Troop, who has a book coming out from Cornell in the spring about hope and values in the age of climate crisis, and how we can cultivate values that may help us muddle through in better shape. So it's been a real honor to direct this program, primarily because of the students who come through the program, and I see them go out into the world and engage in their own communities, or to engage at a larger level than the community level and really make changes. And it feels very different than just being a teacher, where the effects that I may have on students aren't always clear, or maybe I'll get some good evaluations, or a thank you note or something. But when you see people, because of a program that you're involved with, go out and make changes in their communities, man, the ripples are just unavoidable and so inspiring. So I'm delighted to be here today. I'm committed to helping students coming into both of my programs find jobs that allow them to have this kind of impact. And so it's a great opportunity to be here today, thinking specifically about career opportunities in sustainability and resilience, and maybe even regeneration, if we could get to that.
Thank you so much, Laird. I'm going to stop the share here and bring us back to the group. And Angelina, I know you've been monitoring the chat. I don't know if there are any questions in there, but we have such great, there's so much information and so many things swirling. I really would love to hear questions from you as attendees rather than me putting one out there. So if you have them, please do put them in the chat, and Angelina will share them. And while we're waiting for that, though, I wanted to, kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier around the Department of Energy's recent investment, right, and innovation. We're in an administration now that is investing a lot more in climate change initiatives, renewable energy. How is that shift in our administration impacting the work that you were specifically doing? Are you seeing increases in opportunities or movement in things that you haven't seen in the past? So feel free to just, whoever would like to jump in first.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Pamela. In the natural resource management world, we have seen budget declines since definitely since the Clinton administration, probably even earlier, maybe even going back to the Reagan administration. We've seen steady declines. In 2012, we had something that was called federal sequestration. That was a huge budget cut, and it was followed by a long government shutdown. I started working for the federal government in 2011, right in time for these giant angsty budget cuts to come through. And what we've seen is, it's hard on morale too, when you're told, hey, your work's not important, we're cutting your budgets, you have to keep doing the work that you do for the American people, but you have to do it with less money and fewer staff members and fewer resources. So we've been on a trajectory where we've just kind of gotten used to not having even a budget. The Congress's main role is to, besides creating new laws and legislation, is to approve the budget. And in the years that I've been working with the federal government, I think I've had one budget. Everything's just been continuing resolutions. So with that backdrop, with the new administration, and there are some initiatives with America the Beautiful, which is the administration's 30 by 30. It's a United Nations initiative to have 30% of lands in conservation status by 2030. In the US, we call that America the Beautiful. Right now, there's a request for funding proposals that's $85 million to implement America the Beautiful. we are seeing through the bipartisan infrastructure law or bill, we are seeing billions of dollars coming into stream restoration, wildlife corridors, connectivity, getting states to work better together with their state wildlife action plans, and having more coordinated responses. It's like something I've never seen in my career. I've never seen the kind of resources and investments. The Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, is a huge supporter of the work that we're doing and thinking about climate adaptation across the country. And it's the first time where I've actually seen the government put resources behind where it says its priorities are.
Thank you. Stephanie or Laird, do you have anything that you would like to add?
So just going back, your question is, how does the current state of the federal government essentially affect the work I'm trying to do?
Yeah, we're just seeing a different focus from our administration, right? From our current administration. So how have you seen that impact the work that you're currently doing?
Honestly, so working in the Water and Climate Center, we are such a tiny piece of the U.S. Department of Agriculture that we still have to scream and beg for our money, honestly. In the last 14 years, there has not been an increase in the budget for the Water and Climate Center. That is despite the need for increased monitoring of snowpack. Improving our technology needs to happen. I think one of the craziest things about, what we're doing is I think that it might be getting away from some people that we still have to measure the snow, even if there isn't going to be as much as there was. Because part of the implication isn't just reduce snowpack, it's also, you get that snowpack anyway, it comes in a big flurry, like, the Pacific Northwest just had enough water to refill our aquifers that were or reservoirs that were all empty, right? So if that comes in the form of snowpack and it all lands real quick, we need to know about that, because not only does it have climate implications, it also has implications for the safety of recreation for people who are trying to go snowboarding. They need to know if there's an avalanche risk because of a massive snowfall. They also need to be able to tell, like, departments of transportation, has the temperature rapidly increased after a massive snowfall? Are we looking at potential landslide risks? That happened in January. We had a major landslide risk. And if our system had been down, then the Department of Transportation wouldn't have known to tell people to stay off of a certain road that ended up having a landslide. So part of what my role is as a non-scientist is to be that advocate and to go back and say, we need the money. Just because there's less snow doesn't mean that we don't have to measure what's left. We need to be going out there. And, climate change doesn't just mean warmer climate. It also means increasing variability, like insanely if we had a 114-degree day here in Portland, Oregon, that never happened in my lifetime that I know of, maybe when I was like 2 months old. So anyway, so that it's really difficult to try and communicate the messaging up the ladder when you are such a tiny piece of an organization in this, a tiny little cog in this behemoth of a machine that is the federal government. So yeah, that my role basically exists because there needed to be somebody on our team full time who could just be our advocate. So.
Wow, thank you, Stephanie. It just goes to show how much work is ahead of us, right? I mean, even with increasing investments and awareness, there's just that everybody's work, regardless of what they're doing, it's just so vital that everything that everyone can do, and the continual need for advocacy and education. So thank you for sharing. I know that Angelina has a couple of questions that have come from the attendees, so I'll turn it over to you, Angelina.
Yeah, the first question is probably pretty specific to Laird, but I think our other panelists could probably, add to it. So Shelby Cook asks, I live in urban Kansas City and often run into business owners who want to make the switch to an eco-friendly, sustainable business, but often don't know exactly where or how to start. Do you think having a degree in something like MRSC could equip us to work alongside local business owners to help them make the changes necessary for a climate-friendly business and production?
Great. Yeah, I would love to answer that. And it ties into actually what I was thinking about with the last question. And the way that I see things changing right now is that as the climate crisis becomes more and more an accepted narrative in this time right now, we have people, whether they're traditional age college students or folks returning to school, who feel called at this historical moment in our species to make a difference. How can they do work that makes a difference? And that means they're coming in from all different fields, theater majors and accounting majors and science majors and sociology majors, everybody just feeling like they want to make a difference. And so, at least in the case of the Resilient and Sustainable Communities program, we've set that up so that there are no expectations that people will come in with a particular kind of education. So it's built broadly in that sense that we're going to provide whatever education people need, regardless of where they're coming from, but then they're going out to do all of this different kind of work as well. So you can really imagine it like an hourglass, people coming in from everywhere, going through this program and going out to everywhere. And there's really, it's hard to imagine a occupation today that would not be accommodating to somebody with an emphasis on sustainability, whether you want to think about that in terms of cost, efficiency, whether you're mitigating carbon emissions, whatever it may be. And sometimes, sustainability can be sort of a red flag for some folks, but it's just as effective to talk about increasing the quality of life in the community or increasing the functionality of a business or something like that. So absolutely, it may be that in the case of this particular question, Shelby, an employer or a business person that you're talking with may not recognize that the changes that they need to be making are associated with sustainability or resilience. But hopefully in coming through this program, you'll come out with the language and the narrative framework to talk about why this would be useful for them in terms of the bottom line and in terms of the greater good. So absolutely, and I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Laird. And I know, Stephanie, you would like to add, and I think with your unique business background in business, I think you have some additional great insights to share. Oops, and you're muted there.
Again, man, sorry. So I totally agree with Laird, and I gotta say, I need to add, my favorite graduate school class was accounting for sustainability. And the whole thing was teaching us how to put numbers on the ecological and societal benefits and impacts of our choices and put that alongside the financial impacts. And lots of times it demonstrates that, the avoided costs of future legislation because you failed to do the right thing, that's a real number. And we use it in energy efficiency all the time. That's how we justify paying for energy efficiency incentives, is because we're avoiding future costs. And so it teaches you to account for the full life cycle of a product. Like what is the embodied carbon in a product? Once it gets to the shelf, it's already done a whole bunch of damage. And then what happens to it after? What's the end of life look like? Is it going to a grave or is it going to a cradle? So that accountants will excel in that particular class. It was one of my favorite classes. But just like Dr. Christensen said, there's no specialty that you work in now that you can't use to pivot into a career that will help adapt to what's to come and avoid much worse impacts than we might see if we don't all jump on the bandwagon together.
Thank you, Stephanie. I was not on mute and I was typing, so I apologize if I was clicking over your conversation there. I hope everybody heard you well. Angelina, looks like you had your hand up.
Yeah, we have another great question. So are any of the panelists seeing adequate attention paid to climate resiliency investments, or is the focus primarily on prevention?
I could go, but I was just talking a whole bunch, but all right.
Please.
So there are two major initiatives going on at the U.S. Department of Agriculture that I think directly apply to that. There has been a huge effort in helping farmers adapt their farming practices to what is to come. You know, there for a long time, it was just focusing on improving their energy efficiency and reducing how much water that they were using, you know, in various mechanisms. But now it's more also additionally focused on helping them adapt, you know, changing the way that they cycle their crops, changing the way that they, you know, improve their soils. This is obviously not something that I do, but it's happening. And then the other thing that is happening right now, they're hiring for a natural resource specialist who's going to focus on urban farming. And so the USDA will have somebody who is specifically working on getting people who live in urban areas to become part of the food production process themselves. And I think that's getting people more connected to their food process is essential. So those are the big things I see.
Thank you.
You know, I could just add to that really quickly, if I may, that I was looking through, so a number of years ago when we created the program, I don't think there existed a position called a resilience analyst. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, it was Miami-Dade County that I first saw advertised, and now they've got 4 positions open. They're looking for people to work in their office of resilience. And this is sort of true beyond Miami-Dade County and beyond sea level rise and reverse gentrification and all the problems associated with that. We are going to see more and more new jobs created as we move deeper into the age of climate crisis that we can't even imagine yet. And so how do you prepare people with the skills to take on jobs like that? And one of the ways that we do it is we keep track of the new job ads. And when we saw Miami-Dade County post that, we saw, oh, they're looking for stakeholder engagement skills, which I heard Stephanie talk about being her part of her job. So we began to build that into one of our existing courses. When COVID broke out, we realized that we weren't training people to deal with that kind of resilience. So we built that into our emergency management and communication class as well. So it's kind of an exciting time to be in higher education focused on the transition, because it means you have to be sort of on the balls of your feet, you know, bouncing around ready to see, oh, okay, we need to do this. Oh, we need to do that. That's really, you don't get dusty, you know, taking that approach. So it's very exciting.
Thank you so much, Laird. And we have time for one more question. And so hopefully someone will add that to the chat. But while we're waiting, I just want to introduce Mary Scarpa, who is here on the call. Mary is the admissions advisor. She's our associate director of admissions. And she works directly with Laird on talking to students who are interested in our Master of Science in Resilient Sustainable Communities and our Master of Science in Environmental Studies. And we have 2 other programs that directly relate to, well, in addition to many other, but 2 other programs that Mary works with. One is the Master of Science in Sustainable Food Systems and our MBA in Sustainable Leadership. So she is the person that if you are interested in any of that, she will put her contact information in the chat. Do we have any other questions while we have these amazing panelists for just a couple more minutes?
Pamela, I wonder if I could make a point really quickly while we wait to see if anyone
Absolutely.
has.
Sure,
So
thank you.
many times I'll hear from students who feel like there are so many urgent needs right now. Do I work in terms of social justice, food equity, that sort of thing? Do I work in terms of climate or carbon mitigation? Do I work in this area? And they really feel torn, and there's an anxiety that comes with that. There's so many fires that need to be put out, and the thing that I've told them that they seem to really appreciate is as you go through your education, whether here or someplace else, and you find something that really seems to speak to you, that yes, I feel engaged by this work, it helps to trust that somewhere else out there is somebody who's also going to feel called to do some of that other kind of work. And you can be an ally to that person while you give yourself more fully to the work that you feel called to do. And that way you can avoid the burnout that comes from trying to do too many things at once. So I share that just because anxiety that people feel around climate change is such a big factor right now. And I've been trying to work with students on how do we maintain a sense of hope and a sense of agency in the age of this huge planetary crisis. And that's just one basic piece of advice that seems to work well for some of our students.
Thank you so much, Laird. You really
And
touched on
just
something that a lot of people, oh, sorry, I'll pass over to you for Amanda. I was just going to thank Laird for bringing up a really great point, but please do add on to his comment.
Oh, I was just gonna say that if Stephanie, Laird, and I are any indication, you can also switch anytime in your career, whether it's during your education or once you get your feet wet in a career. If you want to go into one route, but then get interested in another route, it's not like you have to select what you're going to do the rest of your life. It's every door that you open opens new doors to walk through, and there's so many ways to explore and grow.
Thank you. And someone in the post, someone in chat wrote, life is interdisciplinary. That is a great way of putting it. Life is interdisciplinary. We share one planet. So I wanted to just just open it up for any final comments that our panelists would like to share, any last bits of advice and wisdom. Feel free to jump in with the time that we have left.
So I mean, I'll go. That I think I really appreciate what Dr. Christensen said about don't let yourself get downtrodden by what feel like insurmountable issues around the world, right? When I start to feel like that, I try to remind myself that until 1976, I couldn't own my own checking account. Is that the year? Yeah, my husband had to sign off on it, right? So social issues are better for me personally than they were then. And it's every kind of change is a slow process, right? Like, because you've got to get others to come along with you. Like, you can want to fix the climate, but you've got to bring everybody else along with you. So like the anger and the angst that we see between people, we really need to get people working together towards the same thing, because you can't do it alone. So if you've got stakeholder management classes in the program, take those classes. If there's negotiation classes, take those classes, because you cannot do this alone. It's going to take forever. So be patient, get a therapist, and be prepared to do the work, because it takes time. But we appreciate that you care enough to try. So hang in there. That's what I had to add.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
If I can add one more thing, and this was inspired by something Stephanie just said about the need to work together in light of the tragic events in Buffalo this last week, and the whole idea of this great replacement theory that seems to inspire the criminal in that act. Keep in mind that probably one of the fastest growing areas in the next couple of decades and beyond is going to be refugee resettlement. And if you're looking for an area that's more human related to work in as opposed to the technology or the science, We desperately need people not only to help welcome refugees, but to help create the conditions in our own communities in which people don't feel threatened by that, in which we can devise some model of what it means to welcome people in out of the compassion that I think is intrinsically a part of the human experience. So it's not just science and technology, it's how do we recreate human communities to be welcoming and healing.
The bottom line, so important. Cannot forget the people as we're moving towards the solutions.
And Amanda, add anything?
Yeah, I was just actually typing in the chat, so I'll just say it instead. But that is a good point. We talked about accounting and business management and various other skills that are really important in the climate change field. Social science is one that we can't leave off the table. It's growing recognition that we need social scientists working on all of these challenges. And if that's your passion, you want to be involved in climate change, but you're drawn more towards the social side, there is a lot of room for an increase in social science participation in these issues. And
Yes.
Also the federal government is hiring a lot of social scientists in these days, and so it's getting easier and easier to find a good job.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. You know, this I think that we'll have a future discussion and panel centered around you know, the connection, the intertwinement of social justice and environmental justice, and how we cannot separate people from planet and the impact. So
Right.
Stay tuned. I think we have our next topic that will be coming up sometime soon. So I really want to thank our panelists, Amanda, Laird, and Stephanie, for taking the time to share your expertise and your insights with our attendees and with us. We all are inspired by you and we've learned from you, and we just really thank you for your time. I want to thank Angelina, who has been an amazing co-host and monitoring that chat function, and Mary for joining us and sharing the information around our graduate programs. But mostly, I would like to thank you as the attendees for taking the time to join us. I know that everybody is so busy, and you know, to sit through an hour, a webinar, you know, sometimes I mean, I hope you were inspired. I hope you learned a lot. Please know that everybody here is available for you. Feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to connect. If you aren't, I think Angelina, can you put my email in the chat? You're welcome to reach out to me if you want to connect to anybody or get copies of the data that we shared in today's webinar. But we really do appreciate your time, and we look forward to working with you as part of our Prescott College community. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.